Yeah, well, as usual, my optimism was a little misplaced there. So if I take a loop aerial here and I tweak the generator to around the 470k mark, which is where intermediate frequencies generally are. I think this is 475, but it near as makes no difference. The loop should normally pick something up. You know, if I do this with a working radio, so you can hear, here's a working radio, and you can hear that as I put the loop near it, it's basically going through the IF circuitry, not the tuner. In the case of this set, I don't hear anything. So looks like an IF issue. I mean, it's got to be that, hasn't it? Although I've said that a few times. Now, yeah, the IF, it's not the usual combined mixer oscillator here. So we've got an oscillator separate here, and that feeds back into this mixer. So two separate transistors for that, and that's the first IF IF transformer there. So I think basically we just do a bit of poking around with the. Yeah, well, there we go. So the oscillator is definitely working, and that is my earth leads come off. So the oscillator is definitely working. Yeah. And if I turn the tuning thing, you can see that it changes as I do it. So it looks like all the tuning section is working. So that must be being generated by this oscillator here. And following this through, now you're looking at the switches, the medium wave switch is S4. So that will mean that S4 here is connected, and so when it's pressed, these 5 and 6 get connected. This is shown in the VHF position. So press those down and the signal should find its way back into here, and then through that back into the mixer stage. So if I go on to the emitter of that mixer, we should have something there. So let's try that. And we do, and it is, yeah, it is moving. Don't worry about that jumping about, that's just the scope auto scaling. Collector, I'm not getting anything though, which suggests that either that transistor VT5 is dead, or something's gone wrong here that's shorting it out. If we were going to try and see if it's being shorted out, what could be shorting it out? The other possibility is, so if you look in the FM position, these two short out this oscillator effectively and ground it to make sure it doesn't interfere with the FM. The mixer, sorry. So if that was still being shorted out, we should be able to measure something across there. Let's go back to this and have a look with the meter then. I'll turn the power off for this. So if I put my meter on to ohms, and I go across those switch contacts, which are 5 and 6 of S2, so that one is S1, that one is S2, so I go 5 and 6 here, so I get 2 ohms, which is not completely open, but then again, I'm guessing if I put it on VHF, it should be short. Yeah, so it's got effectively short circuit once it's on VHF. If I go back to medium wave, across those two, I've got 2 ohms again. Now that is sort of consistent with having the transformer across there. So 2 ohms is roughly in what the ballpark I'd expect for the transformer. Which does suggest to me that maybe it's worth changing this transistor. The only other possibility is maybe that capacitor across it has done something funny to it and stopped it from working. Although if that was the case, well, I don't know, we can have a look at that. So C28 might be a good one to choose to start with and see what happens with that. So C28 is actually here. It's on the print side of the board across the base and emitter of that transistor, so we should be able to lift that out pretty easily really and give it a test. Just put the other end out as well. And where's it gone? I dropped it. Right, let's see if we can test this. And it's supposed to be 68 picofarads, so I'm not sure that the the fluke will do that. Let me get the capacitance meter. So 200 picofarads. It was 0 it out. Close enough for jazz. Let's see what we get. Pretty close, 67. Not going to complain about that. So capacitor is fine. The only other component soldered on here is that 220K, which is actually across the coil. I very much doubt whether that's an issue, given that we're measuring 2 ohms across it anyway. I'm not even sure why that's there. So I think the next thing is whip that transistor out. So let's have a look at the transistor and measure across that, see what we get. This is this is weird. These are these weird pinouts where the base is, the emitter's in the middle. Oh, the pins come off anyway. Yes, the emitter pin's just fallen off that. Well, this means we're going to have to replace the transistor in any case, so, but it might be worth checking to see whether or not it does actually pass. That looks fine, that direction, so that will be the base, I think. That's the emitter, and that's the collector, so so it doesn't look as if there's anything wrong with the transistor, except that I've broken the emitter lead off it, so we're going to have to change it anyway. I don't think I've got one of those sort of transistors, but pretty much any high frequency NPN will do. Sadly, this modification or the replacement of that transistor has provided no improvement. So going back to the circuit again, I can now actually see a little bit of signal here, but it does feel like something's pulling it down. The next thing that goes to, so either something's wrong with this transformer, so I can measure across the transformer and see what I get. So there's the input side of the first IF transformer. As I said, I measured 2 ohms across there, which seems reasonable. It says 4 ohms there, but these things are not always 100% accurate, really. So let's have a look across the output side of that transformer. And you will be wanting to speak to Mr. Fluke. Alright, so let's get back on this. So the output of the transformer is there. So just again measured across the input. On the wrong setting. Measure across the input here. Yes, I get 2 ohms there on the input of the transformer. On the output of the transformer, which is just coming out of the center tap, so the top one there isn't used. That's quite low, really. I don't know if that's right. And the other thing is, looking back at the circuit, it comes out of here and goes off up here via that transformer and then to the base of VT7, which is the IF amplifier. And the base of VT, that's interesting because you wouldn't expect base emitter of that in circuit even to be showing 0.4 ohms. So I think maybe we'll have a look, we'll whip VT7 out and have a look at that next. Right, I've taken VT7 out, but sad to say, I don't think that's the problem. I can test VT7 there on the meter. I think it's the base, I think, yeah. That looks fine. So I think what we're actually looking for here is why, presumably there's still a short across that then. So let's just check that. Is there still a short across that transformer output without the transistor there? Yeah. So back on there without the transistor there, we've still got 0.4, 0.3 ohms across that. So without the transistor there, what would be pulling it down? That takes us back to the diagram. So there's no transistor here now, so where else does that go? The only place it goes apparently is to that coil, is to that transformer coil. I can't see anywhere else it goes. Well, this one's not going to go quietly, is it? What I decided before was that I'd have a look at this transformer assembly here, because when I measured across here I was only getting 0.4 ohms and the total was 6. Now, two things here. One is that I'd misunderstood where this tap was. So I guess that tap would either be about halfway or 2/3 of the way up. Actually, when you look at the coil data, it is quite a long way down. So in fact, it's not unreasonable for that to be 0.4 ohms across there and for this to be 6 ohms across the lot. However, the first part of this coil did appear to be open circuit, but wasn't showing up as such because it's got other stuff in parallel across it. So it looked as if it wasn't, but when he took it out, it was. So we now get to the situation where we have, so I've taken the metal can off here. So that's the second coil. This is the first coil which I took out, which is bust. And maybe I could try and repair that. It's a very fiddly, tiny thing to try and do. I know some people, there are videos on YouTube and things where people say, oh yeah, you can do that with a pair of tweezers. Well, they've probably got more manual dexterity than I have. And in terms of getting a new one, they're pretty much sort of unobtainium, really. Occasionally you might see them pop up on eBay, but the nearest thing is likely to get another one of these radios that is completely totaled and unrepairable, and maybe we can nick the coil out of it. There is another one in here, of course, but it's in use. But what I did was bypassed it, because I wasn't sure. I mean, I'm sure that's not right, because it was obviously designed to have two transformers here and not have just one. But if I go straight from the collector of this onto that second coil there, that seemed to me that it should at least do something, and it sort of does. So if I now put the thing back on, if I turn it back on, so now we get signal on the intermediate frequency. That's set to 470 kilohertz on the generator, and I put it on here and it picks it up, and that's good. Brilliant, I thought. It's fixed then. It's not fixed because although the IF is working, I'm still not really getting any stations. Now, I think part of the problem here, and this is where I started messing about with it again and trying to work out again back to this transistor, the mixer stage. So this mixer stage seems to be the root of all of our issues, and I get the feeling that it's not really mixing properly. So now what I'm going to do is inject it directly onto the collector here. So I'm just going to do a very crude mix here. And I've got it set to something like, somebody's just set it to around 300 meters. So now I'm getting a tunable signal. So this is around, it's slightly out because I've not tuned the IF, but if I move this back a bit, I can retune the radio and pick up the signal as I move the signal around. So it does appear to be working if I do this crude mixer by going directly onto the collector. So it appears we do have AM again now.
What it adds to a match day experience, or why you talking about the return of safe standing?
It's really about choice. That those who want to stand should have...
So what was the issue? Well, interesting one here. We did look at this mixer stage and we had concluded there was some problem with the first stage of this dual IF transformer can. And deleting this bit seemed to get the IF working again, which is good, but then I couldn't get past the reason why it wasn't mixing when if I put a signal in directly it mixed. This wasn't in the end a problem with the radio, it was a problem with storage. What do I mean by that? Well, here's my box of transistors, or it's one of my boxes of transistors that I use. And you can see they're all neatly categorized here. Although you can't really read, or I can't really read, the stuff that's written on the front of them. Not that I bothered to actually read it properly. But in any case, this is a BC548, which is what I should have replaced that VT5 transistor with. This is a BC558, which is what I actually replaced it with. Now, generally speaking, most of these modern small signal transistors are pretty much interchangeable. The only issue is this is NPN and this is PNP. In other words, it's a reverse polarity transistor that I put in. So I'm surprised that it made any noise at all, to be honest, but there you go. Once I've fixed that and put the correct transistor in, it was all fine. So maybe what I should do is, instead of categorizing my transistors like this as they came in the box, I should sort of split them into NPNs and PNPs so I don't make that mistake again. Anyway, it's working now, it's pretty good. I was close to giving up on this, because it had taken so long and I was getting nowhere at times over the last few days. And I thought, is it really worth it? Is it that good a radio? But having got it together and listened to it, the reception on it is pretty good. I've had it running for quite a while in the dining room. It on all bands, it's very good sound. There's a slight problem still with that volume control because there's a bit of a flat spot on it. And so I haven't completely fixed that. I don't know whether I can maybe do something to try and get a newer unit in there, but I'm not going to be able to get a tapped volume control nowadays, I don't think, unless there happens to be one on eBay. But otherwise, I'm quite impressed with it, and I'm glad I persevered and fixed it in the end. The interesting thing is it's got a combination of technologies that in it of the old carbon composition resistors which we saw, which I'd never seen before, but apparently they were a thing at that time, and what they called these, if you remember, the little funny shaped transistors that were what we used to call lock fits, and they were originally designed so that they fitted better in the board when you could turn it over and solder it. But they apparently had a lot of problems, and a few people have got some good websites on this, on the log fit transistors, that they were supposed to solve a mechanical mounting problem, but they actually failed in odd ways, in that the connection between the metal lead and the silicon tended to go a bit off, which meant that those transistors had failure modes where they would just fail as low gain at small signal levels. Unlike most transistors, they either go open circuit or short circuit, but either way this train terminates here. You're not going anywhere, your signal's not going anywhere until you change it. But it's true that those transistors, like the one I replaced, did suffer a bit from low gain. So maybe that was an issue as well, but I don't know. I think it's more likely the fact that the coil being open circuit would have had more to do with it. It's difficult to tell when I've made so many mistakes along the way. As I said at the beginning, or I said earlier in the previous video, I thought this was going to be easy because it didn't make any sound at all. Again, that shows how your default assumptions can lead you off course. But we got to the end of it, and it's a working set again, which is good news.